I'm 22 years old, and my name is Ava. May be curious about how a girl my age eventually moves in with her uncle, particularly in light of what I'm going to tell you. To be honest, I never thought this would occur while I'm learning graphics design, and I spend the majority of my time sketching, creating and working as a freelancer has presented difficulties ever since when I was a kid, my parents were divorced. Wandered a lot in search of stability. Ultimately, I chose to remain with my uncle Nathan. It wasn't intended. Please make sure to follow my channel so I can bring you more in the future. Amazing real-life tales like this one, and remember to view this video. Watch the entire video and enjoy it because this is going to be a really interesting narrative. Interesting, please click like to demonstrate your support. It all began when Mom had to leave for work, so I required somewhere to stay while completing university. My uncle Nathan was the only relative member who is married and able to assist to his spouse. They have been living in Victoria for a few years. In a stunning home I assumed the countryside was far from the city. It would just be a short-term change to a peaceful location, yet nothing changed. Find out how. As anticipated, a few months later, I had adapted to the home, the routine as well as the tranquility, or so I believed, but something happened that I must disclose. Began when I entered Nathan's room. Before I explain, but while he was sleeping, remember to sign up for the channel so that you can remain informed about the remaining. Let me tell you a little about this story. Regarding to me, Nathan is different from most uncles. He has consistently served as a mentor rather than a growing up. A family member taught me how to mend stuff around the house and ride a bike, residence, and even purchased my first vehicle as I turned 18 years old, so when my mother needed someone to bring, I was the obvious one in Nathan. Decision. He's considering, kind and understanding, but it wasn't just I was going to live with his wife. The image of Victoria had been there for 2 years ago, when they were married, and at first, I wasn't entirely sure about her. Older than Nathan, and something like she gave me a sense of alienation. In their first residence, I stayed in the distant guest room edge of the house, attempting to avoid. Gradually, things became less uneasy, and Victoria began to give me suggestions for cooking, cleaning, and housework. Despite the fact that we weren't best friends, it was less stressful than it was prior to my belief that things were getting better. However, lately I've observed anything that will take more time to explain. The more time I spent with Nathan, the more attracted to him. His occasionally smiles when his hand touches and his manner of staring at me when he believed that I wasn't paying it felt like attention. I couldn't ignore the tension because it was different. Started to develop an intensity between us that I know what it was impossible to get out. What are you saying, Ava? You're thinking regarding, he is your uncle. That sounds. I realize this is insane, yet this connection is unquestionably. I attempted to ignore it. I told myself that was just in my imagination, yet every time we were by ourselves, the mood felt as though we were being drawn by something. Here's where things get together. Intriguing. One night after supper, I was engaged in an undertaking. I heard footsteps in the room. Nathan had been dozing off in the corridor, for Victoria was out with pals for hours. We were by ourselves, so I didn't give it much thought initially, but I later heard the door to. I froze for a moment as his bedroom creaked. Second, worried about leaving him to go inside or take a nap, but something tugged. I opened the door and walked quietly, approaching him. He was lying in an attempt to avoid disturbing him. One arm behind his head, on his back, appearing content as he slept in the light. Soft shadows were formed on the window. His face gives him an almost. I stood there for a time, untouchable. My heart racing, I could sense the redness in my face. The pulse. I had never felt this way before, quicken. Perhaps I just wanted to have a look at him, or perhaps it was something else. I had no idea what my ideas were. Stopped when I unintentionally knocked beside his bed, over a vase. The sound created. Nathan opened his eyes and stirred for a moment. For a second, our eyes met. His eyes were bewildered, yet something else to something I was unable to identify. He blinked several times in an attempt to concentrate on. I then chuckled groggily. What have you done here, Ava? Asked in a sleep-heavy voice. My heart was pounding as I searched for the appropriate words. I didn't want to appear as though I was spying, but I was unsure about how to describe. My mouth dropped. I didn't intend to wake you, dry eye stuttering sensation. Nathan sat up, wiping his head slowly, ashamed. He gave me the same kind of smile in his eyes. He always smiled patiently, but today, there was a change in his eyes. My heart was racing because of something before speaking, he looked at me for a time. Once more, "It's all right," he murmured softly, "you know you can always contact me, Ava, I'm available to you." Nodded, but I didn't since my head was racing. Understand how to handle this. Odd, the room seemed thick, and I can feel my breath coming more quickly. I simply wanted to speak with Nathan's smile dimmed slightly as he whispered little, and I believed I caught a glimpse of his eyes paused before it disappeared. He stroked the bed beside him. "You can always chat with me if you come here," he stated. I stood there for a time, feeling warm. I wasn't sure, but I felt compelled to moving forward. Without the tension I felt sitting next to him was thicker than ever between us. Could sense his body's warmth next to the air we were in was filled with his scent. I could hear his breathing from so near, and sense his chest rising and falling. My heart raced once more with every breath. And I looked up slowly, almost in slow motion. Our faces were so near to him that I could sense his warmth. His eyes were gentle, uncertain, but there was an additional spark that caused my skin to. Nathan questioned, "Are you okay, Tingle AA?" Before responding, I leaned in gently. My heart was pounding as I got closer to him, and my chest tightened with each breath, and I was unable to describe it, but it felt like as strong as if the air itself was. Nathan didn't avert his eyes as he charged, grasped mine quietly. Intensity, he spoke just with his breath. Accelerated, reflecting my own, the room sensed the silence between us became deeper as it grew warmer. With unsaid words, my thoughts were in it. Everything had come to this in a whirlwind. I couldn't stop for a moment. I leaned in with my lips softly shuddering like though I were dreaming. They initially brushed across his. It was uncertain, hesitant, but as soon as his mouth touched mine, gentle, and I couldn't quit being gentle. My intellect cried out to me to stop, but my physique denied that I needed this. I desired for Nathan's hand to cue my cheek, pushing me. His other hand was resting next to us, rubbing on my flesh. I could sense the warmth of he touched and kissed deepened, and it was soon difficult to tell where my lips started and his lips stopped. The remainder of the globe vanished, leaving only the two of us. Entangled in this indisputable relationship, my thoughts were racing with remorse and bewilderment, but also with an odd feeling of what were we doing, right? Why did it feel that way? Necessary, as there were no adequate terms to describe. There was no need for it. Therefore he withdrew for only his forehead against mine for a moment. Every breath we took was labored, slow and unsteady. I could sense his heartbeat once more against my skin, corresponding with the quick, my own heartbeat. Ava's voice was gentle but tense. With anything more profound we ought not to, but I wasn't certain. I agreed, but something inside of me wouldn't recognize any justification for stopping. I reached for his hand cautiously, tying my fingers together with his. Didn't retreat. His fingers wrapped themselves around mine, grasping, holding on to me as firmly as I was keeping him close. Our gazes locked, and for a lengthy, we didn't discuss the significance of everything rested on our shoulders. Could my hand have moved automatically to tugging him with the back of his neck? I gave him another kiss, this time closer. There wasn't hesitancy, dread, or the overpowering must remain near him in order to sense his. Nathan's hand moved down my back in my presence, capturing me. The closer our bodies made contact, everything feels so overwhelming. I had no idea where it was. I wanted to go, but I didn't care. Hold on to this time when there are only the two of us were there. My heart was thumping and his kisses traveled to my neck and then to my chest, kissing me tenderly on the flesh. His breath was touching my ear. It was chilling me to the bone. Not like anything I've ever experienced. Intimate, consuming, profoundly incorrect, and exhilarating in a manner that I couldn't describe. You're certain he whispered on my skin about this? His voice was heavy with eye closed, because I didn't want to hurt you. My eyes searching for my voice, everything in me cried out for me to stop, draw away, but the desire was too great to ignore. Must strong that I no longer wanted to think about, refused to ask. I only wanted to be with him, nothing else. Surely I moved my hands over his chest in a whisper, sensing his skin's warmth underneath my. I want this at my fingertips. I want his lips to meet mine, Nathan. Once more, with a deeper kiss this time. Additional critical, there was no going back at this point. The world beyond this place was irrelevant. There was simply the feeling he gave me. Wanted alive and needed in a way I had never previously. The space appeared to encircle us, the light fading as our bond became more intense. Every kiss and touch felt like a assurance of something more. Neither of us is entirely recognized, but we're both prepared to. I could feel his heartbeat as I explored. Stable in opposition to mine, sinking in time with my own beat, and despite the fact that I still battled against the truth of what was occurring in a much bigger aspect of me, gave up absolutely. It wasn't only a kiss. Beyond that, it was more than that. Bond that I was unable to describe, that exceeded my expectations. I've desired this, Nathan, for so long. His warm breath was murmured against my lips. I could hardly understand what he was saying. As I ran my hands over him, sensing the muscles under his skin, his body heat, how he answered me, but there was no going back now, just the hug that brings us closer together in a way that neither of us had. The anticipated time appeared to pause as we became engrossed in one another, in the calm cadence of the warmth of our touches and kisses, and everything felt like the first time. Directly in the room's silence, we are more than simply uncle and niece anymore. Did something bind the two of them? Deeper, something more powerful than everything I've ever encountered. In the air hung thick between Nathan and me. Tension between us both, none of us moving, speaking. The abrupt silence, the sound of the front door shattered opening downstairs. My heart froze. Raced, and I immediately withdrew from Nathan. I'm feeling panicked. What had we just done, chest, and what was taking place between us? The shame rushed over me, but it mixed with I couldn't ignore another longing. I was stuck between our moment and simply disgust, and the fact that we were caught up in something that we couldn't readily reverse. Nathan's eyes didn't move immediately. Were fixed on mine, yet his face was unable to read. I could sense the warmth between, the residual intimacy that hadn't, however, dissipated. His voice was whispered. Before he could speak, he strained. The sound of footsteps continued to reverberate. Nathan heard a voice on the stairs. Instantly identified, it made my heart sink. Victoria. I leaped off the bed with haste. Breathed rapidly and shallow, I was at a loss on what to do. Elevated in all directions, yet I was unable to come up with a solution. If I truly planning to confront her following what had just, the door to Nathan's room opened. Cracked open, revealing her. Victoria filling in for surprise in the doorway, written all over her. Her gaze shifted between Nathan and I was perplexed by her appearance. While seeing the scene, Ava, what's happening here, Nathan? Questioned, her voice uncertain, but there was another factor. An intuition perhaps that informed her that something wasn't right. I sensed the blood dripping out of the appearance of Victoria was like a pail of chilled water, and within that, when everything seemed off, there is no way to defend or explain this. What had just transpired between Nathan and my throat constricted as I found it difficult to locate the I stumbled, uncertain of what to say. Nathan sat on the bed now, and gazed as well as lost his hand and rubbed his back. Neck, obviously feeling ashamed and unsure of how to describe it. Victoria looked at me instead of him, and an unsaid understanding existed. It seemed as though we were in that single at this moment. Everything changed. Victoria realized something had occurred, something that wasn't supposed to. However, her response wasn't what I anticipated. Rather than outraged or disappointed, there was just a profound, disturbing melancholy in her eyes. She entered the room and shut the door. Her presence behind her was controlling, and the space descended into a strange tense quiet, like the prelude to a storm. You must comprehend, Ava. Victoria whispered something softly in her voice. Softer than I expected. There would be more to this than you understand, more than you two do. Recognize that. I observed her bewilderment. Consuming my thoughts. What did she mean? What else was the silence? Remained after Victoria had left her. The words left a mark in the air. On us both, in spite of all the perplexity, her serene comprehension, and an offer of advice offered me something unforeseen, hope that Victoria wasn't upset we weren't cast by her. Putting aside, rather, she offered us an opportunity. That seemed brittle, and I looked at it, uncertain, but still there. Nathan had a mixture of remorse on his face. and perplexity, as well as something else I couldn't quite recognize that he was averting my eyes. I recognized the tense rubbing of hands. He was burdened by what had transpired. How our universes had come into contact, surprisingly, but the more I considered the more I understood that did anyone have a plan for this? Transpired outside of our control, as I understood, was unquestionably something we couldn't ignore. We couldn't act as though nothing had occurred. Victoria was correct. The emotions and confusion, everything had to be addressed, and it needed to be confronted directly. Nathan, I shakily muttered my voice. What should we do now, Nathan, a little? His eyes were filled with a mixture of feelings. I'm not sure how to feel or what to do, Ava. I'm not sure if I should be upset. Is it okay for me to feel ashamed? Anything at all. His voice broke, exposing the conflict within him. He had to choose between the deep and our shared bond and his loyalty to his wife, Victoria, was unable to be resolved in a single discussion. It wasn't that easy. I did some research. Breath and moved in his direction, shutting the I wanted to close the distance between us. I wanted to console him, but I wasn't uncertain if that was the appropriate course of action. I no longer knew what was correct. We won't be able to figure everything out. I just said gently, but I believe that we must speak in order to sincere with one another. This is also. Nathan nodded, finding it difficult to ignore. His expression slowly severe, yet not. Yes, I am angry, but I'm not sure why. Where to begin? I touched his hand. Reassuring and packed with unspoken emotion, we begin by acknowledging what occurred, what we felt, what we are still feeling. And we determine the next course of action. He nodded once more, his face softening. Just a bit. It won't be simple, Ava, but I'd like to comprehend. Recognize the dynamics between us. I clenched his hand, making contact with both, reassuring and full of unsaid. I don't have all the feelings. Nathan responds. I'm not sure what will occur next, but I'm not fleeing from this no longer, and we briefly sat in silence. Both deep in contemplation, attempting to make comprehension of all that had transpired. There was no obvious path. Moving forward is not simple. Response to the feelings, the confusion, everything was so overwhelming, but Victoria's provided us with a give yourself a lifeline so you can face everything. Collaborating to address the problem we were in, and I glanced at Nathan. Once more, and for the first time, I experienced that whatever transpired next, we would confront it with. To be honest, there was no such thing as perfect. There is no easy way to solve the problem, yet there was hope for comprehension and recovery, and perhaps even for something additional. As I retreated, my thoughts racing while using all the potentialities, I couldn't resist considering of what Victoria had said to her. Her composure and her offer of comprehension had unlocked a door I was unaware of. Existed and hadn't turned us away. She had not condemned us, but rather allowed a space to breathe and think. Not only what had occurred, but also what would happen next if we acknowledged the intensity of the feelings we still had. Would we be able to proceed, or would the weight of everything is too much? But those were queries for a later day. It was only Nathan and me at the moment. Seated side by side in the quiet of our shared uncertainty, neither of us knew anything would never remain unchanged. The only thing we might do is proceed with whatever that could be, and together, we would figure it out somehow.